58-year-old mystery has been solved. It's a cold case involving the body of a little boy found in Southern Oregon years ago.
Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. And if you're new to my channel, hello, my name is Gabby and welcome. If you've never been here before, never watched any of my videos, have no idea what I do, I cover true crime cases, and all the cases that I cover are a little bit older. They're all basically 20 years or older. So if that's something that you might be interested in, maybe go down below, click that subscribe button, and also make sure to turn on the post notifications to be notified every time that I upload. So today we have another Doe case, a John Doe case. This is the case of Baby Boy Doe, or the boy in the bundle, not to be mistaken with the boy in the box that happened a few years prior. This little boy was identified a few years ago, but today they are still trying to piece together his story and find out exactly what happened that led to his death. We are taking this one back to the early 1960s. On Thursday, July 11th, 1963, a man was fishing in the Keene Creek Reservoir located along Highway 66 in Ashland, a city in Jackson County, Oregon. It was like any other hot summer day out by the water, hoping for a good catch. What he would reel in, though, would be the shock of his life. His hook snagged something in the water. It was quite difficult to reel in, but when he did, he couldn't believe his eyes. He reeled in a bundle. This bundle was something that was wrapped in some light blue blankets, a patchwork quilt wrapped around these blankets. Then all of this was wrapped completely in wire, and finally it had been weighed down with iron molds. He was confused at first, and upon looking closer into what was inside of the bundle, he realized it was the body of a small child. No one going out for the day to relaxingly fish expects to find something like this. He immediately went to a local fire resource in Ashland. They got in contact with the Oregon State Police, and then the Oregon State Police put the Jackson County Sheriff's Office on the case. The body was carefully taken out of the water and sent to a local funeral home to perform an autopsy on the child. A child who was discovered to be a little boy, only a toddler. A toddler dressed in a white and red striped shirt, gray corduroy pants with a buckle, ankle socks, a diaper fastened with blue safety pins, and his little white shoes. It seemed the boy had been in the water for quite some time, not years, but possibly months. They put his death somewhere around fall of 1962. Of course, the first thing they think is homicide based on the way he was found, but they could not find any indication on his body of how he may have died. What was his cause of death? There were no signs of stabbings or gunshots or fractures to any bones. The coroner would go on to label his death as unknown, but probably suspicious. I would say so. Could this little boy, though, have died due to an accident or natural causes, and then his guardian or guardians or whoever was with him when it happened decided to hide the body so nothing would be pinned on them? That is a possibility. This case kind of reminds me a bit of the case of little William Deshaun Hamilton that we covered recently, because with this boy, they didn't think that he had been mistreated in life. It didn't seem like he was starved, and his clothing was of higher quality. Who was this little boy, though? Jackson authorities combed through missing persons reports of children in the area who have gone missing, and nothing seemed to match up. For a month, they spread the word the best they could of this little boy who was without a name, hoping someone would come forward claiming that they knew who he was. There were tons of tips called into the department, but none of them went anywhere. We have to remember that this was 1963. This was before DNA testing, and especially before you could take DNA and create a DNA profile to upload into a genetic database online to locate familial DNA in the process known as genetic genealogy. This was old school detective work, following every lead that came in, putting up flyers around the town, questioning people in the area directly, taking his clothing and seeing if they could locate where the items were bought. They discovered that the items of clothing that he had on, most of them at least, had come from JCPenney. But of course, JCPenney stores were all across the country, even back then. As for his shoes, they discovered that that style of shoe he was wearing was called jumping jacks and was sold up and down the west coast of the United States. But if they had been bought locally, they may have been purchased from a store called Noble's Shoes in Medford. Unfortunately, the people who owned the store had no idea who the little boy was. If even one item of his clothing had only been sold in a specific area, then that would have helped them better narrow down where he may have lived in life if his family was still in that area. They kept hitting dead end after dead end, and this was surprising because even the FBI got involved in this case at the very beginning. One thing they did do was take prints of his feet, and they sent these footprints to hospitals across the entire United States so the hospitals could compare the prints to baby footprints they had on file. Babies born in the very late 1950s or very early 1960s. They were thinking he was born either in 1959 or 1960, making him about 2 years old, which we would later find out they were spot on when it came to guessing his age. They put his height at 32 inches and his weight between 20 to 30 pounds. This again did not get them anywhere closer to identifying him. They even looked at the iron molds which were used for mining. They knew the manufacturer of the molds but could not narrow down exactly where they had come from or who may have bought them originally. These $25 molds. After a month, they were becoming more and more discouraged because they weren't really getting anywhere. They wanted to bury this boy in a family plot if he had come from a family who actually loved him and missed him, but time was ticking away and they decided it was time to give the boy a proper burial. The little John Doe was buried in a little plastic coffin in Hillcrest Memorial Park Cemetery in Medford, Oregon, under a grave marker that read, "Baby Doe, known only to God." Authorities did not want to give up on this boy, but they truly did not know what else to do. And when it came to the FBI's involvement in the case, an event would happen later that year that took full control of their attention. And that, if you can guess, was the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22nd. So this little boy's body rested 6 feet under, and his case box went on a shelf for 45 years. 4.5 decades this case sat with no more significant updates. Which is probably exactly what the person wanted who threw his body in the water in late 1962. This case was kickstarted again in 2008. Detective Sergeant Colin Fagan had asked an investigator with Jackson County, a man named Jim Tattersall, to look through some stuff for him. In the basement of the Jackson County Courthouse, there were boxes of cold case files, and he wanted Jim to look through those for cold cases that they could give a second look at. In those boxes, they came across a case that piqued their interest. The case of a young boy found in a local reservoir, bundled in blankets. The two of them became determined at that point to give him his name back and hopefully fully solve his case. Thank goodness he had not been cremated, simply buried. They decided to exhume the boy's remains so they could extract DNA from him. They were only able to do this by speaking to the local courthouse and getting a permit to, stating that they believed it was the result of a homicide. A sample was then taken from the upper part of one of his thigh bones. This sample was sent to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification, which is a national resource for the identification of missing and unidentified persons at the University of North Texas Health Science Center. The researchers there were able to create a DNA profile for the boy. Back at this time, 2008, databases were not where they are today. The main thing they did was run his DNA through CODIS, which is the Combined DNA Index System, which is a computer software program that operates local, state, and national databases of DNA profiles from convicted offenders, unsolved crime scene evidence, and missing persons. There was unfortunately no match with that. 2 years later, in 2010, 2 dentists did a 360-degree photo of his teeth, and anthropologists were able to create a 360-degree model of his skull on the computer. With this 360-degree model of his skull, people working for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children were able to create a composite of what the boy possibly looked like in life. Finally, after all of these years, people had an idea of what this boy looked like. Also, after all this time, investigators discovered a new possible characteristic of the boys, something that they never knew before. The dentist working on his skull stated that there were aspects of his mouth that can go hand in hand with people who have Down syndrome. This, of course, caused people to look a little differently at his case. This was now a boy who possibly had a disability, and we know that back then, in those days, these type of disabilities were far more misunderstood. When they looked at his skull, this was when they realized something else. There was a flatness to the front part of his head, which could have been the result of a congenital birth defect. So They at this point were finding out so much more about this little boy, and they had their hopes high for finally identifying him. Years would pass though before there were some more updates in this case. So not only did this case go cold once, but it went cold twice. In December of 2020, so 10 years later, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office learned of a new method of possible identification. This is called phenotyping. Sheriff Nate Sickler had contacted the medical examiner's assistant, Christian Adams, and with the help of Oregon State Police's Human Identification Program coordinator, Dr. Nikki Vance, they submitted the boy's DNA to Parabon Nanolabs. Parabon Nanolabs is a company based in Reston, Virginia, that develops nanopharmaceuticals and provides DNA phenotyping services for law enforcement organizations. They were going to be the ones conducting this method, a method of DNA testing that more looks at the sequencing of genes to determine someone's background and things like hair color and eye color. When it comes to his background, they discovered he was of Northern European ancestry. From this, they were able to determine he most likely had a very fair complexion. They also discovered he had brown or hazel eyes and sandy blonde hair, possibly even a light brown. They were able to take the original illustration of him and put in some color, add a little bit more life to it. After they created a very solid DNA profile, they decided to rebury him. Now we get to the genetic genealogy of this case. A woman we have discussed multiple times before, CeCe Moore, wanted to use genetic genealogy when it came to finding out this boy's identity. She is the chief genetic genealogist for Parabon Nanolabs. She took the boy's DNA profile and uploaded it onto GEDmatch, a genetic database. She was able to locate some very distant family of the boys, and then from talking to people in the area, she was able to locate a suspected half-brother on the boy's mother's side. In 2021, during this update, this suspected half-brother was still alive and living in Ohio. They had already talked to some family members and also discovered from someone who lived in Oregon that there was a family in Oregon for a period of time who had a little boy who had Down syndrome, that they moved away for a bit of time, and when they moved back, this family didn't have this little boy with them anymore. Then they talked to the boy's suspected half-brother to get some more information and see if he remembered anything. They asked him if he ever had a half-brother. Yes, his mother went on to marry another man and had a child with him, and he says that this child was quote unquote funny. The police were a bit confused by this remark and asked the man what he means by funny, and he says, well, he had Down syndrome. He tells police that the boy's name was Stevie. A DNA test was conducted to compare this man's DNA to the boy's DNA, and it was a match. They were in fact half-brothers. So police ask whatever happened to this half-brother of his, and he says that his mother traveled a lot and would take his half-brother with her. One time, she comes back without him and says, we don't have to worry about Stevie anymore, which is gut-wrenching to think about. Investigators on this case really tried and are still trying to paint a picture of Stevie's life to find out how and why this happened to him. By doing that, they found out a lot about his mother's backstory. His mother, at a young age, saw her own mother kill her father, which is very traumatic. Throughout her life, she would have many failed marriages and many children by these men that she married for different periods of time. Sometimes the children would stay with their biological fathers, and sometimes she would send the children to live with some of her other family members, anyone who would take them. She was someone in the long run who had quite a few children, and they would end up living elsewhere. So when she came back without one of her children, I guess this was not a huge surprise to people who knew her. I can't say for certain, but it seems that way. They then were able to locate the boy's birth certificate to prove exactly who he was, because before this, they just had a name. They needed actual proof that this little boy had been born. Baby boy Doe, or the boy in the bundle, would be positively identified as Stephen Alexander Crawford, born on October 2nd of 1960 in Doña Ana County, New Mexico. Like journalist Brian Oxman would say in the Bloodline Detectives episode on this case that I will link in the description of this video, mothers cry. They spent a lifetime crying over their lost child. Not here. Stevie's half-brother says that one day his mother comes back without his brother, saying they don't have to worry about him anymore. And he is never mentioned again. It's as if he never existed. Stevie's mother is deceased and has been for some time. Is it possible that she may have simply given him away though, and whoever took him did something to him? This could have been what happened. We don't know. One woman they spoke to in recent time was Stevie's mother's second husband's daughter. And she remembered being a child and playing with Stevie. This was someone who had cared for him. But of course, she was small at the time. Stevie's mother would go on to separate from the woman's father, and time went on. She, of course, never thought he would wind up the way that he did, that he would die in some unknown way, be tossed in the water to eventually be found by a stranger, and an investigation into who he was would stretch across 58 years. Detective Colin Fagan told KOBI5 News to have a case that we're able to bring a story back to life, to reunite him with his family and ancestors. I think this is just important and very satisfying. So that is the case of the boy in the bundle, a case that yet again proves if there are people out there who care and are willing to put in the work, there's still hope for any case. This is a case where authorities, officials, officers, they put in a lot of time and a lot of effort to try to give this boy some sort of resolution. They wanted to see a positive outcome. I'm currently working on a case with some family of the victim, and it is the complete opposite. And I am very eager to sit down and talk about my next case. So make sure to tune in to that one. Thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to hear about today's case. If there are any cases that you possibly want me to cover here on my channel, make sure to send those over to gabulosiscaserequests@gmail.com. Have an amazing rest of your day wherever you are. Remember to stay safe, and I will see you all in the next one.